Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just 2 more minutes. We're going to give people time to kind of come on today for the session. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat. If you're joining us through Facebook Live, we do have someone moderating that chat. So if you have any questions, you can put those there as well. Aloha, everyone. We're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Today's session is going to be available on our Facebook Live, on our Facebook page. So if you're interested, please find us at MHA Hawaii. We also do provide most of our trainings as recordings on our YouTube page. And so that's going to be at MHA of Hawaii. And I will put that into the chat now. I know some people weren't able to come today, and so we want people to be able to watch it. And if there's some information that you'd like to rewatch, then it's available at any given time on YouTube. This one should post by tomorrow afternoon, and so it will be available. We also will send everyone attending today a PDF of all the slides, and so if you're looking for that link or that resource, it will be shared there. As we move forward, we want everything to be interactive and educational. I know this is a difficult topic, but we want to keep it as informative, but also as supportive as possible. If at any time you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat here on Zoom or in our Facebook Live event so people can answer any questions that you might have. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a brief introduction of myself. I'm the program director. My name is Dr. Missy Sagas here at Mental Health America of Hawaii. Most people do call me Dr. G because it's easier. So feel free to do that as well. And what we're going to be talking about today is a difficult topic. It's going to be about healing and grief. I go ahead and apologize. I do have a cough drop and I have a bit of a cough today, but hopefully it won't be too disruptive. What we're going to be talking about is just looking at some brief statistics on grief. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I do want to give context for the experience that some people are having around grief and why so many people are trying to heal at this time. We're going to look at different aspects of grief and the impact that it does have on people. We're going to talk about self-care. If you've been to any of our previous trainings, you know that's something we're very passionate about is self-care and coping skills, but these are going to be actually very specific to the healing process when someone's in grief. And we're going to learn about how to find someone who's supportive, but also how to support someone who might be going through their healing process and just look at a couple of community resources that are available and are specific to different needs. Because our topic is an intense topic and it's one that I think due to stigma, due to how personal and private it can feel, we just don't talk about it very often. I think that if you are joining us today and you are like myself in an active grieving process, it can feel very overwhelming. And so what I want to do is to go ahead and start this session with some relaxation. We're going to do some diaphragmatic breathing exercises. And so what I want you to do is to just get into a comfortable seated position. And we're only going to do this for a couple of minutes. But get in that comfortable seated position and place one hand on your diaphragm. If you're unsure as to where that is, that pinky finger should just be right on the belly button. Then you're going to place another hand on your upper chest. Now, typically when we breathe from the upper chest, but what we want is that really deep, relaxing breath from the diaphragm. So you're going to try to move the hand on your stomach more than the hand on your upper chest. I am very stuffy today, so I'll be breathing in through my mouth and out through my mouth. But if you are not, feel free to breathe in through your nose and out through your nose, or in through your nose and slowly back out through your mouth. So let's go ahead and take our first really deep breath, trying to move that hand more on the stomach than on the chest. And you'll notice the hand on your chest still moves. It does still move. We're just trying to make that other one move more. You're just holding that breath for as long as this is comfortable, and then slowly breathe that back out. So once again, take that deep diaphragmatic breath, holding for as long as is comfortable, And then slowly breathe that back out again. Excellent. We're going to take the next 4 minutes just to watch a video. And while this music plays and while the visuals are going, just practice on doing those deep diaphragmatic breaths. So I wanted to start and end today's session with some relaxation because I know that the topic that we're talking about is very challenging. And typically in all of the presentations I do, I like to share one of my favorite quotes. And this is actually a quote, a friend of mine who is a direct service provider. She works with people in complex trauma. They're healing through those challenges. And this is one of the quotes that she really loves, and I do as well. It's by Washington Irving, and it just says that there is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, and of unspeakable love. And I think it's just the perfect quote for some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Not to go too deep into these, but we really do want to have an idea of what our community and basically what our country, like the average person that you're meeting on the street, what they're experiencing. And so what we know is that 2.5 million people do pass in the US every year. And that leaves about 5 people around each one of those people that are impacted and are in grief, active grief. About 1.5 million children have lost a parent. And a survey that was done by WebMD found that about 57% of people were actively grieving when they were responding to that survey. And the New York Life Foundation found that about 60% of people believe that grief is a private matter. 45% were not comfortable talking about death, and 63% actively avoided talking about losing someone to other people in their support system. So you can see why it's so important that we're talking about this today, because so many people are impacted and so few are really getting the support that they need. When we talk about grief, we typically think about that being the loss of someone, but it can also be the loss of something. At its heart, grief is loss. That something could be a lot of different things. It could be an expectation of what you thought something would be. It could be the loss of a relationship. It could be the loss of a family home. It could be so many different things that are cherished and loved by you. So it's important to remember that people are grieving different types of things. That grief can look very different, especially if you have a pre-existing history of trauma or if you have repeated griefs. We know that when we go into an active grieving process, some of the things that you have to look at is how much self-care that you've been doing, but also how many coping skills that you have for addressing some of those really difficult feelings. The thing that really highlight is that we all cope differently. So what feels good to me, what's going to help me in my healing process could be very different than someone that I'm very close to in my family, and that we all grieve differently. And I think that becomes a really big challenge. For example, if a family system has lost someone, you might have someone who really needs to talk about what's happening and feels like they're able to do that right now. But you might have someone really close to them who's not in that same space, who doesn't feel like they're able to talk about it yet. And that's actually not one of the ways that they cope. They're trying to do other things. And you can see how complicated that can become. What we want to do is we just want to really emphasize the importance of honoring the process, that people can be in very different places using very different skills to cope, and that all those are okay as long as they're appropriate and that they're healthy. There could be a lot of different reasons, like we talked about just a second ago, of why people experience grief, loss of a loved one, and those losses can look very different. So this could be someone who was lost because of a death by suicide. Again, the relational piece of a divorce. It could be someone having a loss of health because they're going through a chronic or terminal illness. A loss of pet can have a very large impact on someone. Loss of a job, and we know so many people who are experiencing that over the last 18 months. Also, loss of a cherished item, and there's a lot of other things that can be contributed to that. When we talk about the grieving model, there are a lot of different ones that you can look at. The one that is most often discussed is this Kubler-Ross model. But I want to be really clear in saying I'm not using this as a very evidence-based model to say these are exactly what you're going to go through. What I like to do is to use it as more of a conversational model to say, these are some of the things that you might go through. You might not go through some of them. And you're not going to go through each one of them in a linear way. If you do experience all of them, you could have denial and then acceptance and then go back into denial. It could be any number of responses, but this is just a really quick model to say, here's some things people have reported. The Kubler-Ross model does come out of people who were experiencing hospice and what they said that they were going through in their process. The first one is just like shock and denial and saying like this, it didn't happen, it's not happening, not me, if it's something that you're personally experiencing. You can also have an experience of just anger, this feeling of like you're losing control, that you're helpless, there's nothing you can do, and that feels very overwhelming to people. And anger can feel very empowering. So being angry actually makes some people more comfortable than feeling that sadness. But we need to know that that's just the same emotion, it's just the opposite side of that coin. For some, there's a sense of bargaining to say, if I do this, then can this happen? I've seen that with people that I've worked with who have had those chronic illnesses. Like, if I'm really good and I do these things, can this be the outcome? It could also be the same for people who are struggling with a loss to say, this is something that's happened. Like, if only I had done this, and maybe it would have been different. But what we really want to do is to kind of transform that into looking more at just sharing stories of that person and being more supportive around the good parts of their life. Other people can experience feelings of depression and sadness. That's absolutely part of a grief process. And what we hope that people can get into is a level of acceptance. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean to say that you're going to look at that loss and say, that's fine, that's fine with me. But it's more of a radical acceptance. And when I say that, I mean this thing has happened, this loss has occurred, and there's nothing that you can do that will change that the loss has occurred. The only thing that you can really change is how you choose to heal through that process. So put your energy into the healing and try to kind of move away from the denial and to move away from fighting the fact that this inevitable thing has or will happen. And that's a form of acceptance that this model really speaks to. There are other types of grief models, and this one just, and I like it because it's a little bit more broad. This talks about the course of grief. What does grief look like when we take a really large snapshot? One of the things that they talk about is the numbness, that sense of unrealness that can occur in the very beginning. It does happen sometimes throughout as things shift or you get new information or there's this new awareness of something. But the numbness is one of those really big hallmarks for people who are going through grief. There's this other part that you pine for it. You wish for something, you want that thing, whatever your loss is, to kind of return to you, to have that back into your life. And that can be very challenging. And because of those different feelings, you start to become disorganized. Your emotions are disorganized. Your life can feel very disorganized. For people who are going through this, it can be very difficult just getting through the day and doing those basic things. And you're having that really deep sense of despair. And then at some point, you start to reorganize. You reorganize and be able to kind of get back into your day to day. But here's the thing I like about this course of grief model. It doesn't say that you're going to reorganize back to where you were before this happened. Some losses are so profound that it reorganizes you and your values, and it starts to highlight things that are really important for you that maybe weren't as important before or that you just kind of lost track of. And so this reorganization piece can look very different for people. And I think that's why we want to do that really big emphasis on the healing here. We often assume that crying is something that needs to happen, but this is me saying every grief process is very different. And I've been through this grief process. I'm actively in a grief process for myself right now because of some losses. And crying has been part of some of those and not part of others. And I really want to highlight that for people to say that just because someone doesn't cry during their grieving process doesn't mean that they're not actively in it. People cope very differently, and maybe one loss does have them being a little bit more in tune with that part of themselves and crying through the process. And another grief or another loss doesn't have that. And neither one of those are more healthier. It's just where they are. There are definitely individual differences in how people grieve. And so I want you to hear me saying it's okay not to cry. If you feel like you need to, but you're pushing that away from yourself, that's different. That's something that you might want to look at and sit with to see why that's happening. But if it just doesn't happen in the natural process of you healing, then that's okay. That is what that one grief process looked like for you, and it's unique. There are physical symptoms when people are going through their healing process and they are grieving. And we just want to talk about those for a moment. This is just a few that can happen, but generally, people do report having feelings of fatigue, just being very tired from the day to day, maybe needing a lot of naps, just feeling very run down. For some people, they lose that appetite and aren't hungry. Other people may get headaches or body aches and soreness. There can be stomach pain, gastrointestinal issues, which we often see when there's stress and anxiety. There can be heart palpitations, and there are so many more physical symptoms. So I would say if you're actively in a grieving process or know someone who are having, they're just having a lot of physical symptoms, to still have them check in with their doctor. We want to make sure that they're okay, because we know that stress can have a very negative impact on the body. And so we're just going to rule out that there are any other medical complications. But these are things that we actively see. When we look specifically at our mental health as we go through our healing process, we often expect to see things like sadness. Some people do experience depression. Sleep is a huge one, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, because every loss is different and that can impact sleep in different ways. But we know that anxiety, depression, that they're very closely related to sleep issues. And so it's very difficult to heal if you're not getting that quality sleep. We talked about anger and anxiety. And for some people who are in a very deep process, they might have suicidal thoughts. And we'll talk about who you can contact and get support from for those. A big thing that has been talked about recently is the idea that people have been going through this grief process during COVID-19. And I looked and I was having a hard time finding a lot of research around it, which is not unusual. Typically, when something happens, we start to gather the data. That takes about a year or two, and then we analyze it and then we put it out. So most research that you see is about 2 years behind the point in which it was first initially gathered, if not more. They're trying to put this information out much, much quicker because of how rapid things are changing. But this is the stuff that I could find on COVID-19 and specifically grief. What they have found is that people are having more distress over feeling separated. They feel that because not everyone could come together as a community, as a social support system, and be there during someone's grief process. That they had to be very selective about who was able to come, just because of safety, just because of physical distancing and those types of regulations. So there was a sense of separation distress, that what they were going through did not get them that kind of link into feeling connected to their social support system. We also found that there was this element of dysfunctional grief, and I don't want that to be stigmatizing when I say that word dysfunctional, because sometimes we say that and it feels very negative. But really, what I think would be helpful to understand here is that it's interrupted grief. That normally we have this process that we go through and we heal, but because of those different regulations, not being able to share in different rituals, not getting the support that we needed, that process became interrupted. We just didn't get with the expectations that we have as much support as we needed. So they're projecting that that's going to take a little bit more time, and that people are going to have to go through this process possibly a little bit longer, or reach out to different sources that they might not have needed had it been uninterrupted. And for some people, they can be experiencing that post-traumatic stress because of how the loss occurred. We know that some people did pass from COVID-19, and that has its own weight to it. And so there is some sense of people having and reporting post-traumatic stress around the loss and the lack of support around it. I am just going to check our chat for a moment. There was a question about giving meaning to experience in a professional model. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And if I misunderstand the question, please feel free to correct me. But we will talk about making meaning of the experience, because that's the transformative element here that we really want to highlight. And we're going to move into how that happens. But if there's something specific that I don't address, please feel free to drop that back into the chat. As we move through this healing process, it can be very difficult to find the energy to rally. And so we really want to be selective of when you do have that energy, if you happen to be going through that active process yourself, and how you're going to spend that time. I wouldn't want you to be trying to use self-care that worked before you were grieving and find that's ineffective. What we did was we did a lot of research and deep dives to figure out what people were reporting were very effective. And some of this will work for you and some of it may not work for you, and that's okay. We want you to have a long list so that you could kind of try and choose to see what is effective for you. We're going to talk about sleep in just a moment, but getting good quality sleep is very important. Going out and getting some sun, going out and spending time in nature that can absolutely help you reset. Unplugging from technology, and even if it's only for 10 minutes or it's for an hour, however much time you need to just move away and distance yourself a little bit and just re-energize. If you have mastered skills that you're really good at, let's say, for example, that you love to play the piano, that would be a great thing to lean on while you're feeling hurt and trying to get through the healing process because you've already mastered that skill. That's something that you absolutely enjoy, and you can use that while you're trying to move your way through the grief process. Aromatherapy, for those of you who do like it, can be effective. Setting up a really comfortable space can also help. It's just this idea of like feeling comfortable and cozy when grief can sometimes make us feel very uncomfortable. So, getting those cozy blankets, listening to relaxing music or sounds, having that nice warm beverage, those can all make us feel a little bit better. Taking care of something else. So this might seem like, how am I going to rally to take care of something else if I'm struggling to take care of myself? But what we do know from the research is that taking care of something makes you feel like, in my corner of the world, that things are getting a little bit better, even in just this tiny small way. What we saw for 18 months is that the plant nursery industry was booming because people wanted something to take care of to enrich their lives. And that's what we're really talking about right now, is how to enrich your life while you're going through a healing process, because grief is such a loss. It's an experience of loss. So by having an enrichment, a growth around you, a new life around you, it can definitely make you feel like, okay, life continues, life is moving forward. Making sure you're getting those really nourishing meals, that you're getting that exercise. If you're one of those people who enjoy journaling, it can be really helpful just to put those emotions onto a page. Doing different kind of visualization exercises, if you're not able to get out into nature, to take 5-10 minutes and just imagine yourself taking that relaxing walk through nature or being at the beach and hearing those waves crash. That can be just as effective in helping soothe yourself. And then when you're ready, to find someone who's a really great listener and share those feelings. And we will talk about in just a few minutes what you're going to be looking for in that person. We want to be careful that you avoid isolating. And I want to say this with like a little bit of a caveat, because people do need time alone. They do need to figure out what they need. And maybe sometimes things just feel really overwhelming. That's a very normal part of healing. But if you find yourself really isolating from other people, which it can be easy to do, to make sure that you're reaching out and you're getting that support that you have. If you happen to come from a different faith system, to find that spiritual support, that's a really great place to go to get it, because part of your healing process is to make meaning out of this experience. Whatever you have lost, it has to fit into your world and make sense as to why this happened and what happens after it. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes we lose people, and it's just because things happen. That's what happens. People get sick. There are fires that happen, and people lose things that are very important in their homes. There's so many reasons why things happen. And so when I say finding a reason, it doesn't have to make sense in terms of it being a positive reason. It can just be like, this happens. And unfortunately, it happened to me, or it happened to someone I care about. But how am I going to move forward and make sense out of healing through that? It can also be helpful. We talked about exercise, but just going for a walk. It's very difficult sometimes when your energy is low, but going for a walk can be helpful. I'm in my active process, and what I reached out and did was to contact a friend and say, hey, I need to be active. I need to be doing these things because I know that's my self care. And so what I did was I contacted my friend, and he joins me for these hikes and these walks. He's my muddy buddy because we go out in nature and get muddy, but he also knows what the function of that is, so that he can be supportive in case like it's a difficult day, or in case I need to cancel because I just don't have it on that day, and that's okay. Having an activity buddy can absolutely help keep you motivated and keep you moving even when it's tempting to isolate. If you're really struggling, and I'll just be honest and say, It's normal to struggle during this grief process, but if you're really concerned about how long it's been going, how deep that it's gotten, and how difficult it is to pull yourself back out of that grief sometimes to get those basic things done, I would recommend possibly learning some new coping skills to see if that can be helpful. Those coping skills can be as simple as meditation, just practicing being mindful and only focusing on the next 5 minutes in front of you. That's that big present focus and mindfulness. Practicing that radical acceptance we talked about a few minutes ago. And if you're not in a grieving process, learning more about grief literacy so that you can support your community, but also to know that we are none of us going to kind of get through this lifetime and not experience some type of grief. So if you've been privileged enough to not have to go through that process yet, we would love to recommend that you learn a little bit more about grief, which by attending today you are, but also share some of that knowledge with people who might not have gone through it yet or just are uncomfortable about that process, knowing that so many of us are all trying to heal and just really trying to figure out what to do. And sometimes when we are trying to heal, we don't always get the support that we need. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Sleep. Sleep is so restorative and healing, and yet it's one of those first things that really begins to be disruptive. I'm going to check chat really quick. Absolutely. So I will say this because there is a very personal, and thank you so much for sharing that comment because it is so personal that people, when we talk about the loss of someone, that can happen in so many different ways. And just because you share a loss with someone of the same type, so for example, just because I have lost a parent, you have lost a parent, does not at all mean that we have gone through a similar process. But I have found that people go through very different grieving processes depending upon the type of loss. So if that's a death by suicide, if that's a death by homicide, however that occurs, if that's a long extended terminal illness, if you've assisted with someone in hospice, like all those look very different in terms of how you process that, how you heal through it. Um, they are all very different. And depending upon the type of loss, how much support you get around it. And yes, those types of other stressors is how much your grief process is impacted. 100%. There can be very external factors that can interrupt that process. If that is part of your experience, I do think that getting really specific support around that is important. We're going to talk about a couple of different resources, but just to know that sometimes it can be validating to have someone else who's had a similar experience sit across from you and say, yes, I too have had that. My experience was completely different in some ways than yours, but I do know what it's like on a general level to lose someone in a similar way because they're a little bit more sensitive and intentional about how they communicate with you. Whereas some people who haven't gone through that might be trying to be helpful, but the things that they're saying just do not feel supportive. So we will talk about that in just a second. Sleep. Sleep is so important for restoration. And yet, one of those first things that gets really disruptive, what you want to do is to make sure that you have a sleep schedule, that you're sticking to it. You create rituals around sleep. And typically that's about 60 to 30 minutes before bedtime. You're winding down, putting the phone up, turning the computer off, brushing the teeth, putting on those pajamas, those same things you did when you were little to kind of wind yourself down, are the same things you're going to want to make sure that you're doing because your brain picks up on those rituals and will start to hopefully put you into a more relaxed state so that you can sleep. If you are, and depending upon kind of your comfort level, to make sure the lights are down low or completely off, making sure that you have comfortable bedding. I know that seems very simplistic, but we do want to make sure that you have like optimum environmental controls so that you can get as much as possible. Calming sense, if that's helpful. Cool temperatures help to lower the body temperature, which naturally happens when people are going to sleep. But if you're having a hard time going to sleep, you might find that that's not naturally occurring. So just by lowering that room temperature a little bit, it can help kick you into sleep a little bit earlier. We talked about being electronics free. If you're really having a hard time with onset of sleep, trying some relaxation techniques. Making sure that you get sunlight, and that's in the AM. Get that exercise as much as possible in that AM. Try not to eat too late because that can keep you up with the digestion process. And just know that nicotine and alcohol can disrupt sleep when it's really close to bedtime. I love naps. This is me being very transparent. So it says limit napping. Yes, try to limit napping. Do it before 2 p.m. and try to keep it on the same rhythm of the waves that are impacted. So that's about 30, 60, and 90. If you stay within those kind of ranges, you're going to be better for the nap. Try not to go over 90. And if you're one of those people who have a lot of thoughts that come up and you kind of just ticking through them, that's just your natural thought process of I need to do this for work, I need to do this at home, but you have a hard time kind of, okay, I went through it, shutting it down, going to sleep. Try to just dump it. Keep a journal, keep a notebook by the bed, and then give yourself about 5 to 10 minutes before you go to sleep to just jot it all down so that you know it's there, and then you can look at it tomorrow. Don't get too deep into it and adding it, going like, oh, this is my new project. Just dump it, leave it, and check back tomorrow. Everyone will be sent a PDF of these slides. Absolutely. When we talk about loss, when we talk about grief, I think when we really kind of we're going to talk about losing someone specifically for just a few minutes. When we talk about that, it can be very difficult during certain days. We call those memorable days. The reason why is because especially during that first year, it's the first time you're experiencing those type of special days without that person there. That can be birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. And so know for yourself what those days are going to be and plan ahead. Identify what could be triggers for you on that day and make sure that you try to manage that as much as possible. Add in relaxation, add in self-care. And then for those in your support system who are fantastic at being a support for you, give them the heads up and let them know. The people in my support system definitely know when those challenging days are for me. And I get text messages on that day and I get asked, like, are you doing anything special? Do you want to spend time with me or do you want time alone? They're very well versed in grief literacy, not because they naturally were, but because that's something that's occurred over time in learning how to be supportive for me. And so this is an opportunity for people in your life to learn how to support someone through grief. And that's why it's so important for us to learn how to support ourselves through it. If on those memorable days you're thinking that that's going to be very challenging for you, make sure you go ahead and build in that support system and let them know what's happening. And if you want to spend time with specific family members or loved ones, that you let them know and they're able to schedule that out and be very clear about your needs on that day. The other thing to remember is that some of these memorable days have very specific rituals around them. It could be a favorite meal that was always prepared on this day. It could be something that you always did during that day. And just to know that you can continue to do that ritual as it is, just in memory and honor of them. But you can also create new rituals as you need to do for yourself and for your loved ones. I do get asked this question quite often of like, how do I honor a life that I am now grieving? And I'd say that's very individualized. It looks very, very different. For some people, they might decide to get a sentimental item that can be a locket, some type of jewelry piece. It could be any number of things, and that kind of represents like their relationship, and they're able to see it, to use it, to wear it, and that becomes a part of like a daily reflection and memorial of someone. For other people, that's just too much. It's too soon, and that's just not their comfort zone, and that's absolutely fine. Other people might decide to support a cause or like contribute a donation to something that that person was passionate about or that that person was trying to heal from themselves. Other people do living reminders, they do gardens, they plant a tree. I've heard of those being something that people can do. Other people just started a new tradition. And so during those memorable days, one of the beautiful ones I've heard is that people still gathered during that day. They cooked the favorite dish of that person who was there. And then after the meal, they shared a story. Like each person shared their favorite story of their loved one. that became their new tradition. You can also create space in favorite traditions. That is an example of one where they continue to make that dish. Other people I have heard of who continue to set that place at the table or continue to leave that chair with a picture of the person in it that they would typically sit at when they were gathered at a family gathering. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Sharing stories of their life and focusing on that is a very important part of the process. And then you can always engage in your favorite activities, their favorite activities with your loved ones. If that person, for example, would love to go fishing, to get up together with your family and loved ones and go fishing in their memory and just have a beautiful time with your loved ones around that same activity. But again, this is a long, long list, and this is just a few suggestions of things that people have been known to do to honor a life. When we talk about the healing process, I want to be really transparent in saying that that healing process can be a lifelong process. When we talk about it, the idea is that you loved someone and you're always going to love someone. So, yes, you're always going to be healing through the transition of that relationship, that however you make meaning out of it. So, for example, if you are very in tune with a very specific faith base and you believe that that spirit continues to move on even after the body is no longer there, then that's part of your healing process, and that's something that you will hold throughout the rest of your life, is that you still miss them in this one form but they've transitioned to another. That looks very different for people in many different ways. So knowing kind of how that's going to move for you and how you make meaning of it is really important. But what we do know is as you change and transform yourself, because what grief does is it helps you go inward and downward, very deep into yourself, to look at what your value systems are, to start to reprioritize the things in your life and say, this is important and this is not at all important to me anymore because I've lost something that is so important to me that I have a very clear view of what is my value. And I think that we sometimes forget to talk about how natural that process is, how natural life, but also passing and loss can be. And that as we move through that process, as painful as it can be, we do gain things from it. We gain an appreciation for life. And sometimes it's very motivating to us to say, I'm going to live every single day to its fullest as much as is possible because I know that it's so precious. You also get increased empathy for other people, especially those who might have a similar loss in you. Than you say, I had no idea what that was like until it happened to me. So that is still a positive of the experience, that if you do come from a faith base, that it helps you just re-engage with it because you're going to make meaning out of that loss. That also gives you, and for some people, this becomes very heightened, a sense of purpose. And so people that I work with, I happen to also be the co-chair for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention here in Hawaii, because I do have people that I've lost to suicide. And that gave me a sense of purpose to become an advocate for that. Now, some people were ready to become advocates at year 2, and I was ready at year 10. And so it looks different for everyone, but it can change your sense of purpose. It can help you connect with your support system, because when there's a loss, you really start to notice who's able to come and talk to you in a way that feels supportive, who shows up and what they're doing. And you really appreciate that at a deep level. And so it clarifies again your support system. And if there's parts of it that just weren't as strong as you needed it to be, that you kind of tell yourself, that's where I'm at, and I'm just going to add a piece in. And I think that's where professional support can be helpful. Also, peer groups there can be helpful. And again, like I mentioned, it definitely clarifies what is important and what is not. It gives you a clear sense of your values once you're moving through your healing. We keep talking about this support system, right? And we want that support system at its highest level to be just that, which is supportive. But not everyone has great grief literacy. Not everyone is going to do a fantastic job of saying those right words and being that great support. And so we have to kind of radically accept that because we don't talk about it, because there's stigma around it, because people are uncomfortable around it, that they don't always learn those skills. What are we looking for then? We're looking for someone who provides us support and who listens. We want them to be judgment free. We want to be able to talk about our experience without them trying to fix it, because sometimes you just need to talk about it. We also want them to offer advice only when we ask for it. I don't need you again to fix it. I just need you to hear me. And if I need something, I will ask for that thing. We also don't feel validated when our experience is minimized. If you say, well, that was pretty bad, but it could have been worse, and here's how. That is not validating to people. And even if that's your version of trying to say, like, please be okay, because it could be worse and it's not. So, like, that's at least some positive. It doesn't come across that way. And that's okay if that's something that we've done before, if that's something you have said before, just to know now, because we know we learn better, we do better, that doesn't come across feeling like that to someone who's healing. If you're not in an active healing process, but someone that you really love and care about, is what are some things that you can do to be that really great support? Well, improve that grief and mental health literacy. So thank you so much for joining us today, because that's exactly what you're doing by being here. I know it can be tempting, and we see those on the cards that you're looking at that you're going to send someone, but try not to use platitudes. Time heals all wounds, those types of comments, although they're kind of expected in some way because that's what we see, that's what's modeled for us. They're just not genuine. They're just glossing over someone's experience. What we would much prefer to be said is honesty, to say, I don't know what to say, but I love you. I don't know what to do, but I care about you. Let me know if there's anything I can do. You just are very transparent if you're not sure, and really honestly, like, I love you, I'm here for you. That's a fantastic thing just to send. And also to remember, during the grieving process for someone, people are really great at being there 6 months and 6 years after they're not. And so continue to offer support in an appropriate way, not overwhelming them, but continue to offering support even after the fact is very important. Try not to use phrases like at least, or it could have been worse, which is what I just mentioned. And then absolutely we want people to have the power and confidentiality to share information about their own loss. So make sure that you're not sharing information that they haven't either A, approved it being shared out, or B, that they haven't shared themselves on, like, social media. Just be really mindful of not oversharing when it's really their place to be sharing that information. When we feel uncomfortable, we sometimes avoid the thing that makes us uncomfortable. So please don't avoid or ignore the grieving person. If you're not sure what to do, you can just sit with someone, and that's more than enough. Offer practical help. This is one of those things where that's great. I love it. Come and say, like, these are the things I can do, but don't offer them 8 choices, because I promise you they just don't have it to think about, like, what are the things, they just don't have it to go through all those different options. What you can say is, I can bring you, for example, dinner on Tuesday or Thursday, which one works for you? And then they can tell you whether or not they want that, or whether or not those days work for you. That's practical help. Like, can I pick something up for you? I'm going to be in town and I'll be there. Do you need anything? Like, that's just really simple, really practical. Give a listening ear. Again, acknowledging that people grieve very differently, and it's okay for your grief process to be different than someone else's, and continuing that support. There are some books I think could be really helpful, and I think this is one of those topics where it's so painful for us adults to think about a child going through a grieving process, but that absolutely happens. And there are some really fantastic books out there that you can put into your child's library, or a child that you love who's gone through a loss. You can put it into their library, just so it's there and it introduces the idea or helps support them through it. And these are some of my favorite ones. The Heart in the Bottle is about a little girl who loses her grandfather. And so she decides to tuck her heart into a bottle to keep it safe. And then she grows up and she keeps it there. And so that's her distancing people. And as she gets older, she meets another child who needs a little bit more support, and reminds her of what she used to be like. And so she decides it's kind of safe to take her heart out of the bottle again. And then she becomes someone who lives a life that is a memorial to her grandfather. She starts to share those same things that he loves. And so for a little bit older kids, The Rabbit Listen is actually a little bit more younger of an audience than that book. And this is about a child who is building a structure out of blocks, it falls down. They're very upset, and all the different animals come and try to make them laugh and cheer them up and tries to get the child to rebuild. And the rabbit just sits and listens because that's all the child needed. And when the child finishes telling the story, then they are ready to laugh, rebuild, and move forward. And that's a really beautiful way of just saying, like, sometimes listening is the only thing people need. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse is a book I actually discovered during this current active reading process for myself, and it is not very plot driven. It's actually just really quick watercolors with little like sentimental sayings on each one. I have some in my office, and the one I'm looking at now has just a picture of the boy, and he's on the tree limb with the mole and the fox, and it says, "Sometimes I feel lost," says the boy. "Me too," said the mole, "but we love you and love brings you home." So just these really cute reminders with really beautiful watercolors to kind of just like reground you, recenter you in your healing process. And then the fall, Freddie the Leaf is actually a fantastic story for people who are more nature based in their faith system. Doesn't have to be, but it's the story of Freddie the Leaf who comes into his own awareness of being. He has time spent with his friends, and then he notices they begin to fall, and he starts to kind of grieve the process of them falling and what is the meaning of all this. And then he realizes at some point in his life that he is also ready to fall from the tree, and he sees the whole cycle of his life and the beauty of it, and that's really what it was all about. So that was also a fantastic book. Sometimes people ask me for reading recommendations for adults. I don't typically do that, and that's because people can come from a lot of different cultural backgrounds, a lot of different faith backgrounds. And so the books that I would recommend probably wouldn't be a good fit for them. I mean, I have a stack by me that I have read through myself. And every time I read them, I think like that's a good fit for me, but it might not be a good fit for someone else. So I would just recommend going out and doing a little bit of a Google search to see from your own cultural pieces, your own faith pieces, what would be a good fit for you. There are some different resources. I did mention AFSP Hawaii. We have that chapter here if you're someone looking for a little bit more support around a suicide loss. They do a great job. They have a lot of different activities. They have upcoming the Out of the Darkness Walk, which will be virtual and statewide. They're also going to have the International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, where family members and loved ones come together to support each other. You're also going to find the Hawaii Psychological Association's bereavement recommendations. This page is a plethora of recommendations. It has so many on there, depending upon what you're looking for. Also, Grief Share, Navian Hawaii, and Children Grief might have resources if you're looking for those. With all of that information, we're going to spend just a couple of minutes taking those same deep diaphragmatic breaths while watching butterflies. The reason I chose this one, it's a little bit more upbeat, but some of us are returning back to our work day and maybe it feels a little bit heavy at this point. We want to lift it up, but also because I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit for people healing from complex trauma who had so much loss. And one of the things that we did to help them give back was create a butterfly conservation garden. And it was an amazing thing to witness. And so I do have a special like affinity in my heart for butterflies. But go ahead and do that hand placement. And we're just going to spend a couple of minutes kind of regrounding and recentering. So I mentioned to everyone that you will be getting a PDF of the slides. I'm going to hope to get those out by this afternoon, but it may actually be tomorrow afternoon because I'm going to upload this training onto our YouTube page so that if someone that you care about that you would like to have a little bit more grief literacy might be interested in watching it, they can absolutely access that for free. So that link will be included in your email along with a PDF of the slides and a crisis resource sheet in case you need it. If you're looking for upcoming events, do know that we're going to have this training again next month, and you can find that information on our Facebook page. We do have some self-care on our Instagram accounts, and there's our YouTube information. If at any point you're looking for more information about our trainings or any kind of like downloadables, you can visit our website. You can also email me if any questions come up, that info@mentalhealth.hawaii, mentalhealthhawaii.org. And then we do have people in office available to talk to people during Monday through Friday work hours. So that top numbers are our Oahu office and the bottom one is our Maui office. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and check into our chat. Oh, that's super. Okay. I just like started reading right in the middle. Okay, let me not do that. So there was a question. Okay. It's a private question. There was a question about grief circles here in Hawaii that offer that kind of activity and coordinate and incorporate Native Hawaiian cultural practices. I'll be very clear that I'm not aware of any. I would say to reach out to elders within that community specifically to see if they do have those circles. I do know that there are some healing practices that are offered through different Native Hawaiian, like traditional practices in different communities. So for example, Waianae Coast Comprehensive does have a Native Hawaiian Healing Center, and they do offer some support through them with different traditional practices. I don't know that they have a grief circle, but I would say to reach out to elders within that community to see if they do have those offerings. Absolutely. I'll be sending you those slides. Oh, Steph, thank you. The Rabbit Listen has been made into a really cool short video. I don't know if that has been done for any of those other books. I love The Rabbit Listen. It's so sweet. I'm going to have to check that out. Hopefully they will do it for some of those other books as well. Excellent. Someone really enjoyed the butterflies. Excellent. People are going to share that information. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to drop that into the chat. And again, if it comes up for you later, email that info@mentalhealthhawaii.org and we'll be able to answer any questions and provide that kind of support. But we will be sending out the email and just look out for that. We will also send you a link to the playlist that includes the butterflies and the night that was at the beginning. They're called 4-minute meditations. So if you just have 5 minutes or less to do a couple of things, then, I have 5 minutes for self-care, but I don't have time to plan something. Those are really great to do, and they're there and they're free. Absolutely. Someone mentioned that they're going through a grief process for 2 different loved ones and that each one is very different. Absolutely. I'm going as well myself through a multiple grief process, lost several family members in a very short amount of time. And it's true. Every one of those is different. It is, and I'm well versed in this, and it still surprises me just how different each one of those can be. And not to judge that process, but just to say, my being is handling these in a different way, and that's okay. Someone else mentioned, I love the fall of Freddie the Leaf. Ah, yes, they're using it in a grief group in a nursing home. Such a beautiful story. I did mention that it's great for people who are nature based in their faith, but it's also great just to teach people the natural process of life because this is still a natural process. Misha. Aloha, Mishan. I have friends in the audience. Thank you for coming. I hope everyone, after this presentation takes a few minutes to kind of reground. I'm hoping the butterflies helped you do that. If you need any additional support and you're looking for professional support, we don't do direct service in office, but we can help link you to people who are providing care. I know it can be difficult to find right now, but just know that you can call us and we'll help link you to other people who do provide those kinds of services. It's difficult to work with people who have kind of co-occurring pieces. If their relationship was a little bit, as someone noted, it's hard to work with people who have a tendency towards codependencies in those relationships. I will say that when you are in a loss and that loss has had that relationship between you and that other person has had some unhealthy pieces, whether that be abuse, trauma, codependency, that it can be really difficult, but you really focus on that person getting healthier, but also learning to reflect back on that relationship in its complexity and all its pieces. And whatever their faith system is, to be able to make sense of that and figure out how to transition it and to keep healing, because just because that movement from one space to another has happened doesn't mean that there can't be a change in that relationship as well. As you make sense of it, journal it. I know people who have gone through a process of like speaking their truth to someone who passed away that they had trauma with, and even though they're like, I know they're not here in body, but I still feel like I can do this process for myself. That can still happen. If you go to the bereavement page on the Hawaii Psychological Association, the link is going to be in those slides. It is just a long, long page that there's a lot of different support groups there. There are support groups specific to suicide loss, people who are doing hospice care for family members, but that I highly recommend that Hawaii Psychological Association bereavement page because they'll have all types of support groups. I'm going to check our Yes, we got a question about being able to watch the recorded one. Absolutely. When I send out that email with the PDF of the slides, you will get the link to the recording on YouTube. So feel free to share it. Please feel free to rewatch it. I know not everyone can come and make it on time. I myself have been late sometimes to things I wanted to see just because of the nature of work. But yes, you'll have the full recording there. It will also be on our Facebook page because this was a Facebook Live. It won't have the chat there, so there's anonymity, so don't worry about that. But it will have the full recording and then the answers to some of these questions at the end, but you just won't be able to see the question. All right, so if that is, we're a little bit past time, but thank you so much for joining us today and improving that grief literacy and an emphasis on health and wellness. I hope everyone has a fantastic day and that you continue to move through that healing process, no matter what it is that you're working on. Thank you so much.